So this morning, I'm very excited. I've got two very interesting ladies that we're going to speak with. The first one is Lori Vann, and here's a little bit about Lori. So put yourself in this mindset or see if any of this resonates with you. So are you miserable at work? And if so, is it your position, the workload itself, or possibly underlying home life factors seeping into the office? This morning we're talking about how a healthy home life can make your work life less stressful and more successful. And I'm speaking with Dallas-based counselor Lori Vann. So Lori, good morning.
Good morning.
And thank you for being on Biz Talk Radio. We sure appreciate you taking time out of your busy counseling schedule to visit with us and share your insight and wisdom with us today. So just kind of want to get started with a portion of your practice. It focuses on relationship and marriage counseling. And I know that's kind of a heavy subject to kind of start off with. So before you answer that question, let's just talk a little bit about your background and how you got interested in this particular area of concentration in your business, because there's a lot of different tracks that you can take for helping people. So just kind of give our listeners on Biz Talk a little bit about Lori first before we get into your business.
Well, professionally speaking, I'm a licensed professional counselor supervisor and have been licensed in the state of Texas for well over a decade and almost a half at this point, and just in working with a variety of clients, whether I was working in a hospital setting or in a nonprofit or in my private practice, there were certain key themes that kept popping up, and a lot of the problems that I would see go back to relationship issues. And to expand that, particularly boundary issues in relationships and what influences the boundaries that we set or how we feel about ourselves. And so I go through sort of this one thing leads to another until you get to the core issues of really what influences your self-esteem, because that influences who you're going to date or who you're going to eventually marry. It can influence your career path. What things do you try or what things do you not try? And then I work a whole bunch with teenagers, and relationships are a big part of their life, not just with their peers, but obviously with their parents too. So it's just a lot of these circles intertwined with one another.
So when you're working with adults and they're developing these, I guess just kind of paint a picture for our audience as far as what it might look like to work with you. It sounds to me like you ask a lot of questions and just kind of help people discover some things as they're talking about them out loud to you. Is that kind of how you work with your clients?
Yes, I call it more of an interactive therapy. I'm not your stereotypical just sit back and go, yes. And then how does that make you feel? I actually cringe when I can't find a different way to phrase something and I have to use that. I actually just cringe inside because it feels so cheesy. But I am definitely more interactive in the process, and I do challenge them. And if they're not doing something that's healthy and is contradictory, I confront them in a sort of positive way, but say, okay, tell me about this incongruence here, because you're saying this and you're doing this. And we've discussed this. So what's going on here? Why are you sabotaging? I also provide them different resources, whether that's resources in the community or handouts that I've written, articles that I've written for them, or other handouts that I've discovered along the way.
So that way they can kind of do some self-discovery through your guidance rather than you just telling them things or not saying anything.
Yes, because ethically, counselors aren't supposed to tell clients what to do. They can make recommendations and suggestions, and they can throw out all the tools, but it's ultimately the client's responsibility to follow through with them. And that's where I'll tell clients that, look, there's only so much I can do 1 hour a week. I can give you the stuff. You have to decide to follow through with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like, you can give a carpenter a big box of tools, but you can't really go nail into the wall for him. He has to kind of pick up the hammer and do it himself. So
Yeah.
I totally see that. So what are some of the as we look into relationship and marriage counseling, what are some of the common issues that you see come across in your practice time and time again?
Well, oftentimes people will say, we fight about this thing or we fight about this thing. And if you dig a little deeper, oftentimes it comes down to there's a break in the healthy communication. And that you either have one person that's been stuffing their thoughts and their feelings for quite a while, and then that leads to resentment, and resentment kills a relationship. Or maybe they've been passive-aggressive in some manner. Maybe females are a little bit more guilty of this than guys are a bit. The mind-reading thing of, well, they should just know. I'm giving out all of these signs. Why don't they pick up on it? And then I have to remind them that males and females communicate differently, and it's not fair for you to make those kind of assumptions that just because you've been with a person for however long that they can read your mind. It's not fair. The communication is really the foundation, because if you don't have good communication, you can't trust a person. If you can't trust someone, you can't respect them. And those three things are so critical, especially trust and respect, because how can you be in a relationship with someone you don't trust or respect? And then that's where you start to see these other more not quite superficial issues pop up. But when people say, well, we argue about finances. Well, you're arguing about finances because you don't trust the person. And you don't trust them because maybe someone's been doing some side financial ventures, that they've been hiding money. There's something called financial infidelity, which basically means that people are stashing their cash and their partners don't know about it, or they're spending the cash.
I've never heard that term before, financial infidelity. That's very interesting.
It is, and unfortunately I think it's more common than what people think. But again, it goes back to the trust thing of, why do you have to hide what you're buying? Why do you have to keep money off on the side unless there's a trust issue? And it's also very disrespectful, as any infidelity is incredibly disrespectful, but this is another form of it. And when that partner finds out about the situation, there's going to be resentment. And then they're going to feel, well, I can't trust you. And so this just keeps building and building until oftentimes, unfortunately, by the time a couple actually comes to some kind of counseling, one of them's already checked out. It's just the majority of the time that's what I've seen, that one person's already done and they're just going through the motions to either alleviate their guilt for the divorce they're about to file for, or they want to make sure that their partner they see as being fragile is now in a counseling environment and someone else can pick up the pieces with them.
So they don't have to feel responsible for that part?
Yes.
Interesting. So when you talk about males and females communicate differently, I know that could be an entire show. What are there any really key things that our listeners could think about today as they're going through their day and interacting with the males and the females that come in contact with today?
Well, for females, generally we're socialized differently, and females look at communication on so many different levels. We pay attention to the intonation. We pay attention to the word choice. What's the body language? Did they roll their eyes? Did they nod their head? Were they crossing their arms? And so we're evaluating, we're overanalyzing really so much on the communication, and guys are more just straight across. It's basic. If they say it, they pretty much mean it. And they're not looking at all the sub-messages that may or may not be there. And so females get real frustrated with guys because they think that they're being really clear by giving all these hints and, well, I did, do this, or I did slam the cabinet, or I did, toss my hair in a flirty message. Why can't these guys get it? And the reality is that guys don't necessarily pick up on that stuff. Now, some have been trained, they've started to learn, but that's all just, it's our assumption that they should get it. And if basically, if you want to communicate with a guy, just be direct, be clear, no just relying on gestures. For example, if you're interested in a guy, you need to let him know. If you're upset with your spouse, you need to let them know. Slamming the cabinets is passive-aggressive, and they may or may not pick up on it. You doing the whole fine when they ask if everything's okay, they may or may not get that you're really not fine. So just be open and direct, and I guess for lack of a better way to put it, communicate like a guy does. Basically, straightforward, no subcontext, none of these layers, and just, if you mean it, say it, as long as it's done assertively, appropriately, not in a mean-spirited way, and it might change how the communication goes in that relationship and relieve some stress.
Yeah, because really it can be very stressful, and you don't even, I don't think a lot of people even realize, because they haven't had the training that you've had to understand how to communicate with each other appropriately, because, we use our role models of our families, and sometimes that's not always the best role model. So when we're looking at these relationships, how damaging do you think that unhealthy relationships with a significant other can be to your career? Since this is kind of a business format, I know you're in one body, and no matter what is going on in your world, it's going to come with you to work. So what are some of your observations in that regard?
Well, I do think that people can go one of two ways. When things are bad at home, for work, they will either stay at work longer because now that's their escape. That as long as I'm at work, I don't have to deal with the stuff at home. Yeah. And I've seen people become workaholics because of that. It's an avoidance technique. So some people hit the bottle, some people just stay at work to avoid. There are other people that they bring it to work and they have inappropriate boundaries, and they might be emoting all over the workplace, and they're just talking about their personal life, which is inappropriate. But needless to say, I think probably with both of them, but especially the one that is taking it to work, they're not going to be able to concentrate. They are not going to be as productive. Motivation is probably going to be decreased anyway because, realistically, we're humans, and if we're upset and if we're worried about something, it's hard to compartmentalize it. And especially if you're talking about a relationship, your marriage, and you're thinking, wow, when I come home tonight, are they going to be there? Or are we going to have another fight? It's going to be more difficult to focus on work and, whatever task that you're supposed to be doing. So, yes, it can be damaging, and I've had clients that have really started to worry about losing their jobs because of it.
Wow. So how do you separate these two? Are there any strategies that you can share with us to help separate your home from your work life, or is it possible?
It is possible to separate the two. One thing that I give to couples is that if whoever gets home first, they get to have some of that downtime, relax, change out of their work clothes if possible. And sometimes if you have young kids with you, that you're not able to do that. The second person that comes home, let them go straight back to the bedroom for about 15 or 20 minutes, get changed out of their work clothes, basically de-escalate from traffic and work environment and whatnot, and then they come out, and then the person that got home first, then they go back into the room, and then they get their 20 minutes of time to just decompress. And one mistake that I've seen couples make is that one person walks through the door, the second person comes through the door, and the first one is all primed of, well, let me tell you about how bad my day was, and let me tell you what your child did at school, because whenever a child does something bad, it's always the other parent's child. It's just, and if they do something well, then it's, well, my child got the A. Doing couples counseling can be quite entertaining sometimes. And when I do my dating seminars, those can be a whole lot of fun. There's a lot of jokes to be had. But if you're coming through the door and you've just battled traffic, the last thing you want to have happen is be attacked by your spouse with all this negativity, and boom, you've got a fight going on.
Right.
So basically, go your separate corners, chill out, have dinner. Don't have any bad discussions during dinner. Let that be a time of safety and peace. And then after people are relaxed, you know what, then go on a walk, then have the discussion. You're going to be in a different frame of mind. But that also brings up exercise is an incredible helper for separating work and business, and exercise is medicinal. There's so much research that shows that, medicinal mentally and physically.
Right. And I have heard, and you can help me know if this is a true statement or not, but men actually communicate fairly well when you're side by side rather than face to face. Is that true?
I could see that happening because and I guess you can just think of how boys might stereotypically be raised, because you see them on the athletic bench, the baseball or the football bench, and they're side by side. And that's where they have conversations, and it's more comfortable, because to look at someone face to face, that's out of their comfort zone, versus females, we're the opposite. And that's just one of the joys of the differences between the genders. But that may be much easier because they're more comfortable in that environment. And for females, we're really all about the talking, that if we can just talk, and for guys, a big tip for them is if your female is sharing a problem, you do not have to solve it. She's not asking you to solve it unless she directly says, please give me your advice. Sit back and listen. So, and so many guys, and that's how they're trained, is here's a problem, you solve it. That's what I do with my buddies. And guys really can make things worse if they try to do that with their spouse without them asking for it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. A lot of times people just need to vent.
Yes.
So when you're going through some of these, and by the way, if you've just joined us, we're speaking with Lori Vann. Lori Vann is a very successful Dallas-based counselor, and she specializes in lots of different areas. And today we're talking about marriage, relationship counseling, as well as how it kind of works into your work life. So, Lori, how much support should we ask for and or expect from the people that we work with if we're going through a difficult situation? I mean, sometimes people don't even like to tell anyone that something at home is happening.
Agreed, and this can be a very tricky situation. And in a Boundaries in the Workplace seminar that I do, we discuss, okay, how much does your boss need to know versus how much does HR need to know? So if you're going, for example, on short-term disability, HR might need to know things that your boss doesn't necessarily need to. And sometimes people share way too much personal information with their boss, and it can be detrimental. So it's... As far as expecting the workplace, realistically, your boss, your job, that company has absolutely no obligation to you to be your caregiver, to be your support, to provide any of those resources. And unfortunately, that's just the cruel world and how it is, but they're not responsible for making accommodations for you. Now, one can really hope when you're selecting a company to work for that you look at employee satisfaction records and you look at, do they have a small company feel even though they're a Fortune 500 company? What's their attitude for helping employees that may be going through struggles? And that's where maybe smaller companies are a little bit more understanding, because it's a little bit more of a family feeling to it. That instead of your boss being this distant person, this is someone you see every day. They get to know you.
Right.
That the CEO that's in another state, they don't know you from anyone else, really.
Right.
So being realistic, they have no responsibility to help you out. It's just, you hope that you find a good company that is understanding.
Yeah, and it's a tightrope. And I've been in small companies and I've been in large companies, and as an employee, and I have seen how each culture handles it differently. Some are very empathetic and will bend over backwards to make sure that since you've worked hard, that we want to support you. And some of them are like, it's not my problem.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to deal with it. So if we are working through some of these things, besides, of course, seeking out professional counseling, from yourself and the other professionals that might be out there, what are some of the things that people can do on their own? I mean, you've written a book yourself, right? About is it an experience that you've personally experienced, or is it about the experience that you've been gathering through the course of 15 years and being in your profession?
Well, the book is a caregiver's guide to self-injury, so it does provide tips for caregivers who know of some family member or friend or whatnot that has been self-injury, and that's much more common than what people think, and adults do self-harm as a way to cope. With stress, some people, go to pills or a bottle or other unhealthy things, and some people take it out on their body physically through hitting themselves or skin picking or other methods. And so the book does go into some tips for the caregivers of how do you take care of yourself and how do you set proper boundaries so that you're not making emotionally based decisions that can make the situation much more difficult.
Sure.
But for those going through some life-changing event, whether that be a divorce, a serious breakup, a child being seriously ill, I stress so much that self-care is crucial. And self-care, so what I call the trifecta of self-care, is sleep, is the absolute cornerstone of everything. And eating healthy and exercise, and the three are intertwined. They influence one another. If you don't have good quality sleep, and that's one of the problems is when we're anxious or we're depressed, our sleep is one of the first things that can change. But we have to make sure that we're really working to try to get quality sleep because that affects us mentally and physically. And then that leads into, if we don't have enough sleep the next day, one study said we eat 40% more calories the following day after not getting enough sleep.
Wow.
And if you look at America's waistline and the stats that show we're not sleeping enough, and we also have a big obesity problem, so there you go. The eating healthy influences how well you think, too. If you eat cruddy, you feel cruddy. If you're eating cruddy, you're not able to concentrate as well. And then exercise, that third part, and as I said, exercise is medicinal mentally and physically speaking because exercise is great for stress management and it helps regulate our appetite and it helps to regulate our sleep patterns.
So all of these things, they all work together. It's all things that we've kind of been told all throughout our lifetimes, and it helps with lots of things, cognitive thinking and obviously working through stress and being healthy to be fully present for the relationship. I mean, all of these things make so much sense. So, Lori, unfortunately, we are out of time, and I am really sad because this has been such an engaging conversation. I'd love to have you back when we can talk a little bit more about your book and some of these other things that you work on. Remind us, how can our listeners find you?
Well, I have a website of www.LoriVann.counseling, and it's LORIVANN counseling.com. I also have a Twitter page at Self-Injury Guru, and there's also the YouTube channel, which is Lori Vann Counseling or Lori Vann LPC-S, either one, and that has different videos, and you can do the basic email at lori@lorivann.com.
Wow. And you do seminars, too, so on your website, does it give the dates and the locations of the different seminars in which you're coaching or counseling in?
Yes, I have one that's this Saturday for the public on self-injury that's in Carrollton, Texas, which is just north of Dallas. And that will be this Saturday at 10 o'clock. And then I have other ones coming up in November for different school districts and also for a Family Matters conference with the Galaxy Center.
Wow. Well, folks, again, this is Lori Vann, and she does interactive therapy here in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Lori, thank you so much for being here, and look forward to speaking with you again very soon.
Well, thank you very much.